We begin with this breaking news rocking the White House. President Trump admitting on tape he knew how deadly this coronavirus was back in February. Now, that matters because it's evidence showing Trump was deliberately misleading the nation about this threat as he played it down. This was before it really even hit the U.S. So listen to these tapes, which really offer more damning evidence and seem even worse today than when Trump said these words in February. Take a look here. We're going to play for you the newly released material.
It's a very tricky situation.
Indeed,
it goes through air, Bob. That's always tougher than the touch. You know, the touch, you don't have to touch things, right? But the air, you just breathe the air, and that's how it's passed. And so that's a very tricky one. That's a very delicate one. It's also more deadly than your strenuous flus. You know, people don't realize we lose 25,000, 30,000 people a year here. Who would ever think that, right?
I know. It's
pretty amazing. And then I say, well, is that the same thing? This is more deadly. This is 5 per, this is 5% versus 1% and less than 1%. So this is deadly stuff.
Deadly stuff. And he had the data top of mind. These excerpts are new from the Washington Post, as I mentioned, from legendary Watergate reporter Bob Woodward. Now, we don't know what came before or after Trump telling Woodward that the virus was so deadly, worse than strenuous flus, but this was February 7th. At the time, Americans were living through normal pre-pandemic lives. There were just 12 cases in the country, a flat case count, to say the least. But Trump had the intel then in secret, and according to him, he believed it. Woodward reports also that Trump's national security advisor warned this was the biggest national security threat the president would face. By March 19th, it was a growing crisis. 4,000 cases, 48 deaths, quarantines on the East Coast. And Woodward, in the next clip I'm going to play you, he presents these facts pretty diplomatically and just asks point blank how Donald Trump came to pivot in his approach to the virus. But as I was just discussing with Nicolle, in what is pretty damning Trump's own words, he stresses in this taped interview, his goal was just to play it all down.
It's clear just from what's on the public record that you went through a pivot on this to, oh my God, the gravity is almost inexplicable and unexplainable.
Well, I think, Bob, really, to be honest with you,
sure, I want you to.
I wanted to always play it down. I still like playing it down.
Yes,
because I don't want to create a panic.
Now, pandemic experts were not concerned at that juncture about panic. They were concerned about apathy, because getting the facts out about these dangers, what Trump called this deadly virus, so much worse than the flu, getting those facts out, as you probably know by now as a news viewer, can help save lives. Woodward shows that Donald Trump knew it was deadly in February, which makes it all the more damning that he was telling his own supporters after that, publicly, these falsehoods.
A lot of people think that goes away in April with the heat, as the heat comes in. Typically, that will go away in April. We're in great shape. We're going to be pretty soon at only 5 people. And we could be at just 1 or 2 people over the next short period of time. But that's a little bit like the flu. It's a little like the regular flu that we have flu shots for. And we'll essentially have a flu shot for this in a fairly quick manner. It's going to disappear. One day, it's like a miracle. It will disappear. And from our shores, it could get worse before it gets better. It could maybe go away. We'll see what happens. Nobody really knows.
Nobody really knows. That's a common expression the president uses. What's important here is that he knew. He knew the facts. He knew the dangers. He knew this was deadly and said so himself. He just wanted to play it down, compared to the flu, when he knew it was far worse. On February 7th, the day that Trump revealed the dangers to Woodward, the case count at that point, as mentioned, was flat. Here's how it looks since then. That downplaying approach to governing and communications was wrong, and you could see the massive spike, 6.3 million recorded cases nationwide. We are approaching 192,000 deaths. The president responded today by saying that his goal was always to keep people calm and avoid a, quote, frenzy. That's his spin tonight after being caught on tape. Now, just put the science to the side for a second. When has Donald Trump ever worried about creating frenzies in public or in the press? He lives on that kind of thing. The new spin makes no more sense than the old spin because this is about lies. Lies caught on tape. I'm joined now by Michelle Goldberg from the New York Times, David Frum from The Atlantic, and Dr. Zeke Emanuel, who, like David Frum, has White House experience. Great to see all of you. Michelle, whether or not this is surprising, which is sort of a Beltway media question, what do you see as substantively important in evidence, tape, of what the president knew and when he knew it?
Well, look, it's not a secret that the president is a liar, but I think that what this tells you is about the intent behind the lies. One thing about this president is, besides being a creator of propaganda, he's also an avid consumer of it. And so when he's saying something that's untrue, it's never entirely clear whether he knows it's untrue or whether distinctions between truth and falsehood have any relevance for him. I think what this shows us is that he was very clear about what was actually going on. And he very deliberately and repeatedly told the country something else. And I think that we all know that the only panic that the president was concerned about tamping down was panic in the stock market, right? So he lied to the country. He lied to his own supporters. In some ways, this reminds me of the Steve Bannon scandal, in that the people that Trump and Trumpists treat with the greatest contempt are their own supporters. He put people in grave danger. He has caused a crisis he has exacerbated a crisis that's led to, hundreds of thousands of deaths. And he did it, I think it's pretty clear, both out of apathy and also because he was concerned about what a stock market crash would mean for his reelection.
Dr. Emanuel, Michelle lays it out and reminds everyone what that word panic really could mean to him and why that was about personal interest. It is true that there has been a learning curve for many people. And it's always easier in hindsight to look back and say, gosh, in September, what we think about where this headed feels very different than when everyone was learning on the fly in, say, March. But people like you inside a White House, people like the president, tend to have a jump on those things. What is interesting or striking to you about the fact that the president was already taking off the data on the death rate before this had hit the U.S.?
Well, he knew how serious this was going to be. His national security advisor told him, and then he told Bob Woodward how serious it was going to be and how uncontrollable it's going to be. And the fact that he didn't take decisive action on February 7th has meant that 190,000 Americans have died. Maybe less. Well, we're sure less would have died had we taken decisive action on February 7th. Action that would be similar to, say, what Taiwan did to lock down and to prevent people coming into the country and it spreading on the country, and to lie repeatedly to the public about not wearing masks, not social distancing, and having a rally like he had in North Carolina, which flouted all of this. He really is got a lot of blood on his hands because many people ended up dying needlessly because of the way he managed the government and encouraged people to do things that we know increase the transmission rate and increase the risk of dying. And that is a horrible place to have a president. That is not leadership. That is a failure of leadership.
David?
Well, here's what's so strange about the president's action. You can cover up a crime. You can cover up a scandal. You cannot cover up a pandemic. If what Donald Trump was saying was correct, as it was going to happen. He knew at that time that very shortly he would be confronting massive disease, massive death. What he also, if he thought about it, would have understood is that world leaders have acted decisively in many countries and from every point of view, whether they are right of center or left of center. Those who acted decisively have become much more popular. Justin Trudeau in Canada is in the middle of a big scandal, but he's got pretty good numbers because of the COVID response. And Angela Merkel, her numbers are up. And in Australia and New Zealand, leaders are up. And in South Korea and Taiwan, leaders have seen their polls up. So he knew, and he chose or Cuomo, who mismanaged many of the early parts of the scandal and yet of the pandemic. I think we should understand this in conjunction with the report from the whistleblower at the Department of Homeland Security about how President Trump has tried to cover up the news of Russian interference in the election and dangers from white supremacist groups, which is, as what Michelle said, President Trump is kind of a victim here. He thinks he can actually manufacture reality through words. And so he concealed in February and March, not thinking maybe someday there'll be an April. Maybe someday there will be a May, and doesn't June follow then? And won't there be a July after that? Won't at some point this explode? He really thought he could lie his way through a pandemic. And that suggests that he is actually a much less rational person than the act of lying would suggest he is.
Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.